Fuma Conspiracy wasn't well received at the time of release, but I suppose the response at least suggested that Lupin III still had an audience to TMS. Budgets were evidently still a bit stringent in 1989, likely due to Akira's resource heaviness, as well as Little Nemo's bombing. Chances are this affected pretty much all of TMS's anime production, even with the added deals with Western animated shows by that point. It's likely for that reason that instead of a full TV series, we saw the beginning of the era of annual made-for-TV movies. Evidently they did pretty well, as there was an uninterrupted run all the way to 2013, where they started to shift back to TV series, but even then we still see a few here and there to this day. In fact, as of this video, between TV movies, series and OVAs, Lupin III has had something airing every year since 1989, with the exception of 2020, likely due to the pandemic. That said, we did get 2 TV movies as well as 2 theatrical in 2019. These TV movies, like the series before them, were pretty episodic, meaning you can watch them in more or less any order without worry for continuity, and tended to run on a formula of sorts. While not always the case, the gang were often split up at the start, coming together when the plot would call for it. Each movie also introduced a one-off leading lady, akin to Castle of Cagliostro's Clarice. The role of each lady can vary, ranging from platonic to love interest, allied to enemy, or perhaps even a mix of all the above. Our leading lady for this movie is one Lady Isabel, voiced by Yubiko Mazuka. Also of interest is, due to them being annual, they serve as a bit of a time capsule for their release. Granted, Lupin III is no stranger to this, as despite the Geneon dub trying to cover it up, Series 2 was a pretty clear reflection of the late 1970s. In regards to the movies, they're never super political or anything, but you do sometimes see the odd situational mention or cameo from politicians who are definitely fictitious coincidental resemblances. There's also a shift in the technology. In fact, this first movie makes use of the often visited Lupin Burgess technology plot point. It's funny seeing this movie and then, as you progress to watch more recent ones, seeing the gang using conventional mobile phones and laptops and so on. One big sticking point with Fuma Conspiracy was the replacement voice cast not being well received. As I mentioned in that review, Lupin's actor himself, Yasuo Yamada, was among the critics, having gotten into an argument with Monkey Punch over it. For the most part this was resolved, at least to a point where he returned along with the rest of the Series 2 cast. Unfortunately, Yamada would pass away in 1995, while the rest of the cast would continue on until 2010, as age was pretty audibly catching up to them by that point. Most of them would retire their roles with the rather fittingly named The Last Job, only coming back for one final 10-minute short about 2 years later. Also returning is composer Yuji Ono, who created a new variation of the ever-classic Series 2 theme. Evidently the idea was to draw on Series 2 as it was the best known period of the franchise, reflected in the music as there were quite a few remixes of tracks from that era over the coming years as opposed to Series 3. That's not to say Series 3 was disregarded. The ending theme for this movie, Endless Twilight, bears resemblance to one of Series 3's tracks. I'm not too sure of the name of the original track, but it's the first track that you hear in the first episode of Series 3 as Lupin's dreaming of surfing in San Francisco. Series 3 also got a bit of acknowledgement here and there in the general writing of some of these movies. This is probably due to Hiroshi Kashiwabara's influence, who got his start on Lupin during that era and even wrote the final episode. He contributes to the first 5 of these movies as a writer, as well as a few more in the coming years. Working alongside him, at least early on, is director Osamu Dezaki. Dezaki worked as a storyboarder for Lupin III in the past, and is also credited for an often used technique in anime, namely the freeze frame that's coloured with a lot of intense lighting for dramatic effect, and it does get use in these movies. The English side of things also has some stuff of note. Manga Entertainment acquired this movie in the mid-1990s, using the same voice cast they did for Secret of Mamo, as well as the name Wolf for Lupin due to the whole LeBlanc estate issue. Funimation acquired several of the movies that followed, and as of this video, Discotek Media has been getting distribution rights to re-release as many as possible. Naming for this movie is a bit of an oddity too, as the Japanese name can apparently translate to Bye Bye Liberty Close Call or Bye Bye Liberty Crisis. Discotek's release goes with Bye Bye Lady Liberty, while manga's name that I'm using for this video, as it's how I first saw it on the Sci-Fi Channel, back when it spelled its name properly, goes with Goodbye Lady Liberty. On that note, let's begin with recapping the movie. We begin with Zenigata arriving at police headquarters in Paris. He's there to retrieve information from their database on Lupin, also a bit too eager to take it off-site, despite the staff's insistence that it can't be removed. The real Zenigata's waiting for Lupin as he exits. Lupin manages to evade Zenigata by racing along the rooftops. He eventually makes his escape via a flying device and grenade. Sometime later, Lupin's fallen into a depression. Jigen manages to track him down to a hideout in New York with a new job. Lupin declines. One reason being the data that Interpol has on him is in every police headquarters in the world thanks to that pesky thing called the World Wide Web. The other being his new girlfriend Judy, that Jigen notes is a bit of a gold digger. Goemon doesn't have any interest in Jigen's job either, wanting to go back to training and being wary of the man who set it up, Rooster. Fujiko meanwhile is cozying up with her latest billionaire, a man named Jimmy. She also listens in on a phone conversation and discovers he's number 3 in a certain organisation. Zenigata manages to track down Lupin's hideout. The place is empty save a young boy, Michael, who has a fair amount of knowledge on him and his history with Lupin. Jigen preps for the job alongside Rooster. Lupin appears, as Judy's dumped him and left him $300 million in debt. More important right now though is the group of men outside that have them in their sights. They fire smoke screens, so Lupin splits off from Jigen, telling him to get Rooster to safety. He manages to gain control of a truck, but ends up underwater. As Lupin overhears where the men plan to head, he encounters Michael. Michael demonstrates his knowledge of Lupin before asking him to handle a job. Lupin refuses, heading to meet Jigen. Unfortunately, Jigen's been pinned down as Rooster is shot. The men demand the location of the Super Egg Diamond from Rooster, who hid it somewhere in the Statue of Liberty. Jigen tries to stop him, knowing they'll kill him either way, and one of the men moves to shut him up. Rooster takes the bullet, allowing Jigen to counter. Unfortunately, Rooster dies, taking with him the diamond's location. Jigen explains to Lupin that the men were part of the group known as the Three Masons, as in number 3 rather than 3, and they decide to carry on the heist now they're caught up this deep. With the knowledge of the Super Egg's rough location, they head to Liberty Island in the early hours. The Masons are prepared and launch an attack. Lupin counters with some toy ducks that explode. It happens. They enter the statue itself with the aid of jetpacks. In order to give them some time to find the diamond, the plan is to steal the statue itself, equipping it with a giant balloon to airlift it off the island. Michael's been waiting for Lupin and Jigen in the statue, thanks to his computer calculating their moves. The statue also happens to fly by Fujiko and Jimmy's private plane. Jimmy's less than thrilled, realising Lupin's plan to steal the Super Egg. Meanwhile, on board a train in Alaska, a group of men are on the hunt for a certain woman. Goemon is also on board, disarming them with ease. The woman, Isabel, thanks him for his help. He doesn't have quite so much ease around her, but hey, 3 for 3 on the most recent movies and Goemon getting a love interest. Ganbare Goemon. A helicopter attacks the train, forcing them to disembark. Goemon manages to dispatch it pretty quickly at least. Hiding the Statue of Liberty in the Grand Canyon, Lupin searches for the Super Egg despite Jigen suspecting it was mixed in with the concrete from the 1986 restoration. Lupin turns to Michael for help, but he'd need data on Rooster in order to get a lock on the diamond's location. Michael then elaborates further on his own job, wanting Lupin to locate a special kind of computer virus known as the Neovirus. He explains what computer viruses can do, as it's still the 1980s and knowledge about them isn't as widespread, and also talks about how the Neovirus can completely rewrite any data, including Interpol's files on Lupin. Lupin shifts focus, but Jigen tells him to keep his eye on the ball, or egg-shaped diamond in this case. News has started spreading of the Statue of Liberty's theft, and Zenigata instantly recognises it as a Lupin heist, as he's still more knowledgeable about Lupin than any computer. Michael keeps watch as Lupin searches the statue, using camouflage on the location to avoid notice when needed. Jimmy spots it thanks to his own tracker, however. He heads to the Three Masons' main headquarters with Fujiko in tow. When she's left alone, she moves into gear, knowing the Three Masons have a pretty sizable jewel collection. She finds her prize, but overhears Jimmy talking with number 1, real name Silverman. Silverman has some kind of force breath power, punishing Jimmy's inability to obtain the super egg. He also senses Fujiko, but stops Jimmy from killing her for the moment. Zenigata's managed to convince a taxi driver to head to the Grand Canyon. Better luck than one of his previous encounters with a taxi driver at least. That said, the driver's not pleased at having to head through the entire Grand Canyon due to wanting to spend time with his family. He changes his mind thanks to getting spun out by a squad of cars headed by the Three Masons. As Lupin rests, he hears Michael talking in his sleep about his mother. The full moonlight causes the statue's torch to light up, leading him to realise the super egg's location. They retrieve the diamond just in time for the Masons to reach them. One of them fires a missile, which Jigen manages to shoot out. The force of the blast still knocks him into the river, so Lupin escapes with Michael. Despite the best efforts, Zenigata's taxi is out of fuel, so he leaves the $4,000 bill with Interpol and goes it on foot. He and Lupin both meet by sheer chance at a bus stop. They're all exhausted, but seeing Lupin gives Zenigata a burst of energy and allows him to launch the cuffs. Jigen, on the other hand, is a bit more lucky, rescued by Goemon and Isabel. Stopping him with the local sheriff, Zenigata arranges for an Interpol pickup. As he and Michael sit down to a meal, Lupin sits around chewing gum. Turns out he's concealed one of his toy ducks in a bubble. He blasts the jail and reunites with the gang. They escape to New Orleans and start ribbing Goemon about Isabel. Jigen also mentions that there's a potential buyer for the super egg here, unaware that Isabel's listening in as she showers, but Lupin doesn't have it right now. Heading out for drinks, Isabel decorates Lupin with a flower, working her charm. Lupin has a bit too much, complaining that Isabel's sharing a room with Goemon while he's stuck with Jigen. It's all an act though, as he's well aware the flower's bugged. They meet up again, though not quite as one-on-one as Lupin thinks. Isabel tells him she's a jewel collector and is willing to offer a good price for the diamond. Before he can answer, they're interrupted by the bar's pianist attacking. The gang head back to New York, Lupin noting he's shared some of his brand of gum with Michael. Michael's also en route to New York with the super egg, courtesy of Zenigata. Isabel remains cryptic as to why the Masons are after her, even with Lupin offering her a discount on the diamond's price. Meanwhile, Silverman performs a ritual on Fujiko with the intent of putting her under mind control. Zenigata and Michael reach New York Grand Central, where they're greeted by one of the locals. Said local is actually Lupin, blowing a bubble with the gum to indicate his identity. Michael splits from Zenigata and hands Lupin the ball where he hid the super egg. As the gang head off to finalise the deal, they're greeted by Fujiko, who's acting a bit odd. Not so much the floating as the being uncharacteristically affectionate to Lupin. Lupin makes the exchange, which leads to Fujiko making her attack. The Masons appear, taking Fujiko, Isabel and the diamond. Michael wakes up in the confusion and recognises Isabel as his mother. Jigen manages to shoot down Fujiko as she escapes. Back at their hideout, Michael explains he doesn't really know Isabel too well as a mother because he was only a baby when she left, but he does know she's a computer expert like him. She also created the Neovirus, but he cares more about getting a chance to tell her he hates her for leaving him as a baby. Silverman contacts Lupin, instructing him to bring the diamond to him the next morning. He then releases Fujiko from his control. Jimmy meets with Isabel, revealed to actually be the number 2 of the 3 Masons, and she works her charm on him to convince him to usurp power. Goemon gets a head start on everyone the following morning, feeling that guarding Isabel is his responsibility, with Zenigata spotting him along the way. Lupin and Jigen decide to make Fujiko Michael's babysitter, much to her annoyance. Isabel works her charm on Silverman, though it's all a ruse to give Jimmy the chance to shoot him. The pair are informed that there are 2 intruders, with one, Zenigata, pretty easily caught. The other, Goemon, is hurt at Isabel's betrayal, but can't bring himself to attack her initially. His hesitation results in being dumped down a trapdoor, reuniting with Zenigata down below. Lupin arrives to make the deal. He then discovers that Silverman is dead upon kicking the diamond his way. He and Jigen are also sent through the trapdoor themselves for their trouble. He's not down there for long as he has jets in his shoes. Only enough to get partway back up by himself, though he assures the others he'll be back for them. Maybe. He then encounters Jimmy as he ascends, taking out his men pretty easily. Interrogating Jimmy, Lupin learns that Isabel and the Super Egg are both needed to access the Neovirus, otherwise Isabel would have been killed by now. Jimmy then tries a rather easily deflected attack. Disguised as a Mason, Lupin watches as Isabel prepares the ritual with the Super Egg. He realises she hypnotised herself into forgetting the code for the Neovirus, and the Super Egg's light is part of a series of triggers to unlock her memory. Jimmy arrives as Isabel finishes, thanking her for the Neovirus before stabbing her. Fujiko and Michael have made it to the rest of the gang's location by swimming under. She has a grapple ready so that everyone can rejoin the fight. Well, everyone except Zenigata anyway. Lupin escapes with Isabel, who tells him there's a helicopter on the roof. Lupin tells her that her son is waiting, but Jimmy catches up to them before they reach the roof. Thankfully, the rest of the gang also make it, and Goemon takes out Jimmy and destroys the Super Egg. Jimmy's still hanging on, and heads to the control room, planning to use the Neovirus to launch a mutual missile strike between America and Russia. Michael detects this and offers to head back down to disarm it as Isabel's on her last breath, with Lupin offering to help out. Jimmy shoots at them as they arrive, but he's too weak to stop them. Lupin then helps Michael reach some of the harder buttons to disarm everything. They succeed with barely a fraction of a second to go. As a last-ditch effort, Jimmy hits a self-destruct on the building. Everyone finally makes their escape as the building falls. With her last moments, Isabel reconciles with Michael, also noting that Goemon reminds her of Michael's father. Back at their hideout, Lupin works feverishly to replicate the Neovirus, intending to rewrite all the data Interpol has on him. As Jigen and Fujiko discuss Goemon returning to his training as well as future heists, Lupin seemingly replicates the code. As I mentioned, they seem to pull a bit from the Series 2 era of Lupin here. For the obvious, it starts with the gang separated for some time before coming together for a heist, Lupin's back in red, and we get the old Series 2 theme, albeit remixed. One could also draw a few parallels to Secret of Mamo, what with the ancient scientists and the rather trippy imagery, especially with Fujiko's mind control ritual and as Isabel prepares to unlock her memories on the Neovirus. Certainly retains a bit of that weirdness of the previous parts of the franchise. Also funny that Fujiko gets mind control both here and in Mamo actually, as I suspect the art team used that movie as a base for the character designs in this one. The movie also does a good job of showing just how dangerous Lupin can be. He seemingly memorises the Neovirus after only seeing it briefly for one thing, so it's probably a good job he just uses it to wipe his debts and the police data rather than anything more nefarious. Not to mention that, while it wasn't his target, he's capable of stealing the Statue of Liberty with little effort. If you want to start off your next era with a bang, that's certainly a way to do it. Plot-wise, everything comes together pretty nicely, beginning with Fujiko and Jimmy and tying them to both Lupin's heist and Goemon's encounter with Isabelle. Also a nice touch that Zenigata knows Lupin well enough that his instinct is enough to track down his Grand Canyon hiding place. Rooster's more a plot device than a character, but serves the purpose of motivating the gang to search for the diamond at least. Michael's okay enough, I suppose. About what you'd expect for your tag-along child. I suppose it helps that they have a longer time frame to develop him and his ties to the plot. Not like the super intelligent child hasn't been done in the series before, though in this case it does seem to play with him still being a child, what with his strange relationship with his mother, despite his genius compared to some of the others. Overall, a good start to the TV movie era and definitely worth a watch. Next time, the gang get caught up in a battle for a banana republic as they try to solve the mystery of the Hemingway papers. Until then,